Picture this. You're 8 months pregnant, hiding in a domestic violence shelter, finally safe. Then you wake up at 2 a.m. and he's standing in your doorway. The restraining order, the locked doors opened, the security system hacked. How did Derek Hartman find his pregnant wife when even the police couldn't track her location? That's just one of 3 moments where Brooks Sullivan's world collapsed completely. This isn't a fairy tale where a hero saves the day. This is a true story about a woman who had to become her own hero. 60 minutes from now, you'll never look at courage the same way. Stay with me. And if this grips you, show some love, comment, share. Let's spread stories that empower. They say your life can change in a single moment. Mine changed with the sound of metal against bone. The 911 call came in at 11:43 on a Thursday night. The dispatcher's voice remained calm, professional, even as the woman on the other end screamed words that would haunt the recording forever. "He broke my leg. Please, I'm 7 months pregnant. He's going to kill us. Please hurry." The dispatcher kept her talking, kept her focused. "Ma'am, I need you to stay on the line with me. Can you tell me your name?" Brooke Sullivan. "Please, he's still here, but I can hear him." A crash in the background. Glass shattering. Then a scream that made the dispatcher's blood run cold. "Units are on their way. Brooke, 2 minutes out. Are you somewhere safe?" "There's nowhere safe. Not anymore." Police cruisers screamed through the quiet Houston suburbs, their sirens cutting through the peaceful evening like a knife. The neighborhood was the kind you see in magazines. White picket fences, manicured lawns, cars in driveways that cost more than most people's annual salaries. Halloween decorations still hung on porches even though it was already November. Pumpkins on doorsteps, wreaths on doors. The kind of place where bad things weren't supposed to happen. But they did. They always did. When Detective Garrett Sullivan heard the address come through his radio, his blood turned to ice. 15 Oakmont Drive, his sister's house. The house where he'd helped her paint the nursery just 3 weeks ago, where they'd laughed about baby names and argued over whether blue was too traditional. He grabbed his keys, his gun, his badge, and ran. His partner Travis Reed shouted after him. But Garrett was already gone, taking the stairs of the precinct 3 at a time. His hands shook as he started his car. Not Brooke. Please God, not Brooke. He made it there in 8 minutes, running every red light, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst through his chest. The front door hung open, a dark mouth leading into horror. He could hear crying from inside, desperate and broken, the kind of sound that comes from a place beyond pain. He drew his weapon and entered, calling out, his voice cracking despite years of training. Brooke, where are you?" The living room looked like a war zone, furniture overturned, a lamp shattered on the floor, its pieces scattered like broken promises. Family photos knocked from the wall, glass crunching under his boots. The coffee table flipped on its side. And in the center of it all, his baby sister lay curled on the carpet, both arms wrapped around her swollen belly. Her right leg twisted at an angle that made his stomach turn. Blood pooled beneath her from cuts on her arms where she tried to defend herself. Standing over her was Derek Hartman, her husband, the man who had promised to love and protect her, the man Garrett had never quite trusted but had accepted for his sister's sake. Derek still held the metal pipe in his hands, breathing hard, his face twisted with rage and something else. Panic. The realization of what he had done dawning in his eyes like a terrible sunrise. "Step away from her," Garrett commanded, his voice deadly calm despite the fury burning in his chest, despite the urge to empty his weapon into the man who had hurt his sister. "Drop the weapon, now." Derek looked at him, and for just a moment, Garrett saw the man his sister had fallen in love with. Scared, confused, lost. Then the moment passed, and Derek dropped the pipe. It clattered against the hardwood floor with a sound that echoed through the house, final and damning. "She made me do it," Derek said, his voice slurred from alcohol, his eyes unfocused. "She wouldn't listen. She never listens. I asked her for help, for the money, and she said no." What kind of wife says no? Garrett moved forward, years of training taking over, suppressing the brother and becoming the cop. He had Derek in handcuffs within seconds, reading him his rights in a voice that shook with barely controlled rage. Then he knelt beside Brooke, carefully touching her shoulder. afraid of hurting her more but needing to let her know she wasn't alone. "I'm here," he whispered, his throat tight. "You're safe now. The baby's going to be okay. I promise you, the baby's going to be okay." But Brooke just stared at the ceiling, tears streaming down her face, one hand still protecting the life growing inside her. She didn't speak, didn't acknowledge him, just lay there, broken in more ways than one, her lips moving in silent prayer. Her eyes were unfocused, shock settling over her like a shroud. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Garrett stayed with her, talking softly, telling her help was coming, that she was strong, that she would survive this. He wanted to believe it himself. The neighbors had gathered outside by the time the paramedics arrived. Miss Peterson from next door, her hand over her mouth, her face pale. The Johnsons from across the street, their teenage son recording everything on his phone until his father grabbed it away. Mr. Wallace from 3 houses down, a retired veteran who had heard enough screams in his life to know real terror when he heard it. All of them watching as Brooke was carried out on a stretcher, as Derek was shoved into the back of a police cruiser. All of them whispering, wondering. How had they not known? How had they not seen there had been signs? Surely. The way Brooke stopped coming to block parties. The way Derek's voice sometimes rose through open windows on summer nights. The way she wore long sleeves even in the Texas heat. But that was the thing about violence behind closed doors. It wore a mask. It smiled at block parties. It waved hello at the grocery store. It looked just like everyone else, right up until the moment it didn't. Until the mask cracked and everyone saw what had been there all along. As the ambulance pulled away, lights flashing against the perfect suburban homes, Garrett stood in his sister's driveway and made a silent promise. Derek Hartman would never touch her again. He would make sure of it, no matter what it took, even if it cost him his badge, even if it cost him everything. What he didn't know then was that this was only the beginning. The worst was still to come. Brooke Sullivan had always been a romantic. She believed in fairy tales, in happy endings, in love that conquered all. Her mother used to read her princess stories before bed, and even after their father left, even after she learned that some princes were really villains in disguise. She held on to that hope, that somewhere out there was someone who would choose her, cherish her, stay. When she met Derek Hartman at a friend's barbecue on a warm spring evening, she thought she had found her fairy tale at last. He was handsome, confident, successful. Not pretty boy handsome, but rugged, masculine, real. He owned his own construction company, drove a nice truck, and had a smile that could light up a room. His hands were calloused from work. His laugh was genuine, and when he walked straight up to her and offered her a beer with an easy grin, she felt her heart skip. "I'm Derek," he said, his voice warm and inviting. "And you're the most beautiful woman here." It was a line. She knew it was a line. Her friend Sarah had rolled her eyes and whispered, "Smooth operator alert." But the way he said it, looking right into her eyes like he could see something special that no one else noticed, made her believe he meant it. They talked for hours that night about everything and nothing. He asked about her work as a graphic designer, seemed genuinely interested in her portfolio. She asked about his business, and he told her stories about construction mishaps that made her laugh until her sides hurt. They discovered they both loved old movies, the black and white ones with dramatic music and sweeping romances. They both hated mushrooms, which Derek claimed was proof they were soulmates. They both wanted to travel to Ireland someday, to see the green hills and ancient castles. "My grandmother was Irish," Brooke said. "Sullivan, I've always wanted to see where my family came from." "Then we'll go together," Derek said. And even though they'd just met, even though it was crazy and presumptuous, something in Brooke's chest tightened with hope. They exchanged numbers that night. He texted her before she even got home. "Best conversation I've had in years. When can I see you again?" The courtship was whirlwind and romantic. Dinners at nice restaurants, weekend drives along the coast, late-night phone calls that stretched until dawn. Derek brought her flowers at work, making her coworkers jealous. He remembered small details. She mentioned her favorite coffee order, the author she loved, the type of music that made her cry. 3 months later, he proposed at sunset on Galveston Beach. The sky was painted in oranges and pinks, the waves lapping at their feet. He got down on one knee in the sand, pulled out a ring that must have cost 3 months' salary, and asked her to be his wife. She said yes without hesitation, tears of joy streaming down her face. This was it. This was her happy ending. Her brother Garrett had concerns, though. He pulled her aside at the engagement party, his detective instincts making him cautious. The party was at her apartment, cramped with friends and co-workers, everyone toasting the happy couple. But Garrett had watched Derek all evening with narrowed eyes. "Are you sure?" he asked quietly, steering her into the kitchen, away from the noise. "You've only known him 3 months. Maddie." "I'm sure," she said, laughing, using the nickname only he called her. "Gary, when you know, you know. Don't you want me to be happy?" "Of course I do. I just want you to be safe. There's something about him I can't quite. You're being overprotective. He's a good man, because he treats me like I'm precious." "Everyone's good in the beginning," Garrett said, his voice is serious. "I've seen too many cases. Maddie, guys who seem perfect until what? Until they're not. Derek isn't like that. He's nothing like Dad. He's steady, reliable. He has a business, a life, a plan for our future." Garrett had sighed, knowing he couldn't argue with love. "Just promise me something. If anything ever feels wrong, if he ever makes you uncomfortable or scared, you'll call me, no matter what time, no matter what." She had hugged him then, told him not to worry, told him he was being ridiculous. Derek was different, special, her future, her forever. The wedding was small but perfect. White roses everywhere, their fragrance filling the small church. String lights hanging from the trees at the outdoor reception. A first dance to an old jazz song her mother loved. Tears in her eyes as she watched her daughter marry. Derek whispered promises in her ear as they swayed together, his hands warm on her waist. "I'll protect you forever. You'll never have to be afraid. You're mine now, and I take care of what's mine." At the time, the possessiveness in those words felt romantic. Later, she would remember them differently. The first few months of marriage were bliss. Derek brought her coffee in bed, made just the way she liked it, left her little notes around the house on the bathroom mirror, tucked into her purse, stuck to the fridge. "Good morning. Beautiful. Can't wait to see you tonight. Luckiest man alive." He held her close at night and told her she was his whole world, that he'd never been happier. When she got pregnant 4 months after the wedding, he seemed thrilled. They hadn't been trying, but when the test came back positive, Derek had swept her up in his arms and spun her around the kitchen. "A son," he said, his hand on her still flat belly. "I know it's going to be a boy. I can feel it." "We don't know yet," she laughed. "Could be a girl." "Boy, he insisted. "And he'll be strong, smart, everything I wasn't growing up." It was the first time he'd mentioned his childhood, and when she asked about it, his face had closed off. "Nothing to talk about. That's all behind me now." But as her belly grew, something shifted. Small things at first, easy to dismiss. He started working later, coming home after she was already in bed, seemed distracted during dinner, checking his phone constantly, snapped at her when she asked about money or baby expenses. One night, she suggested they start looking at baby furniture, showing him a crib she'd found online, and he exploded. "Do you have any idea how expensive everything is? The hospital bills alone are going to bankrupt us. Can you not think about anything except spending my money?" She had stepped back, shocked by the venom in his voice. "Derek, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." "Just stop," he said, his voice cold in a way she'd never heard. "I can't deal with this right now." Then he grabbed his keys and left. He came back hours later with flowers and apologies, his eyes red from crying or drinking. She wasn't sure which. Said work was stressful. Said he was worried about being a good father, about providing for their family. Said it would never happen again. She believed him. She wanted to believe him, because the alternative was too frightening to consider. What Brooke didn't know was that Derek's construction company was bleeding money. What she didn't know was that he had partnered with a man named Lance Barrett on a real estate development deal that had gone catastrophically wrong. What she didn't know was that Derek owed $180,000 to people who didn't accept excuses. Lance Barrett was the kind of man who wore expensive suits and spoke in a voice that sounded reasonable, even when he was threatening your life. He had introduced Derek to investors, people who called themselves businessmen but were really loan sharks with rollercoasters. When the development project collapsed, those investors wanted their money back, with interest. "You have 60 days, Lance told Derek over drinks at an upscale bar downtown. After that, things get complicated. Derek drank his whiskey neat, his hand shaking slightly. "I don't have it. The company's accounts are empty. Everything's tied up in equipment and contracts." "Then untie it," Lance said calmly, "or find another source. I'm sure your wife has family. Her brother's a cop. Cops have pensions. I can't ask Garrett for money." "Then ask your wife. Women are good at saving. They hide money in cookie jars and sock drawers. Find it." Derek had gone home that night and searched. He found Brooke's emergency fund in a lockbox in the closet. $15,000. Money she had saved from her freelance design work. Money she had set aside for the baby. For emergencies. For their future. He stared at it for a long time. The cash sitting in neat stacks, held together with rubber bands. Then he closed the box and put it back. He couldn't take it. Not yet. But the pressure kept building. The loan sharks started calling, then texting, then showing up at job sites. Derek started drinking more. Coming home later, his temper grew shorter, more volatile. And through it all, Brooke carried their son, her belly swelling, her body changing, completely unaware of the storm gathering around her own. She did notice Paige Winters, though Paige was a real estate agent who called the house sometimes, asking for Derek, always apologizing for bothering them at home. Always with a voice that sounded just a little too familiar with Brooke's husband. "Who's Paige?" Brooke asked one evening as they sat at dinner. "A business contact," Derek said without looking up from his phone. "Why?" "She calls a lot. She's helping with some properties. It's work." "Brooke, don't start being one of those wives." "What kind of wives?" "The jealous kind, the paranoid kind, the kind who drive their husbands crazy." Brooke fell silent, a knot forming in her stomach. But she didn't push. Not then. 2 weeks later, she found Derek's phone unlocked on the bathroom counter. She told herself not to look, told herself it was wrong, an invasion of privacy, a sign she didn't trust her husband. But her hands moved anyway, opening his messages before her brain could stop them. The texts with Paige went back months. Hundreds of messages, photos, promises. "Can't wait to see you tonight. She'll never make me as happy as you do. Just a few more months and we can be together for real." Brooke sat on the edge of the bathtub, one hand on her belly, the other holding the phone, reading words that shattered her world. Her husband was having an affair, had been having an affair since before she got pregnant. Everything she thought she knew was a lie. When Derek came home that night, she was waiting in the living room, his phone on the coffee table between them. "Who is she?" Brooke asked, her voice surprisingly steady. "How long has this been going on?" Derek's face went pale, then red. "You went through my phone. You had no right." "How long, Derek?" "It's not what you think." "Then what is it?" "Explain it to me." And that's when he lunged forward, grabbed her arm, and everything changed forever. The argument started with words. Sharp, cutting words that filled the small living room like poison gas. Derek paced back and forth, his hands clenched into fists, while Brooke stood her ground despite the fear crawling up her spine. "You think you can question me?" Derek shouted. "In my own house, about my own business." "Your business," Brooke shot back, her voice shaking but defiant. "Last I checked, this was our house, our marriage, and you've been lying to me for months. Paige means nothing. She's just someone who understands me, who doesn't nag me constantly about money and babies and... I'm 7 months pregnant with your child. Derek, your child, and you've been cheating on me." He stopped pacing, his eyes wild. "Don't take that tone with me. Or what, you'll leave, go ahead. I don't need you. My brother will help me. I'll be fine without you." That was the trigger. The mention of Garrett, of her having a life without him, of her surviving. Derek's face contorted with rage, and before Brooke could react, he had grabbed her wrist, twisting it hard enough to make her cry out. "You're not going anywhere," he hissed. "You're my wife. This is my baby. Mine. You don't get to just walk away. Brooke tried to pull free, but his grip was iron. Let go of me, Derek. You're hurting me. Not as much as you've hurt me. Do you know what I've sacrificed for you? What I've given up. I'm drowning in debt because of this house, because of this life you wanted, and now you want to leave. What debt, Derek? What are you talking about? He released her suddenly, and she stumbled backward, catching herself against the wall. For a moment, they just stared at each other, both breathing hard. Then Derek laughed, a bitter, broken sound. The real estate deal, the one with Lance, it fell through. I owe money, a lot of money, and I need that cash you've been hiding. Brooke's blood ran cold. My savings, that's for the baby. For emergencies? This is an emergency, Derek said, his voice dropping to something quiet and dangerous. Give me the money. Brooke, no. The word hung in the air between them. Final. Absolute. And in Derek's eyes, Brooke saw something she had never seen before. Not just anger, not just desperation, but hate. He turned and walked toward the garage. Brooke stood frozen, her hand on her belly, feeling the baby move inside of him. Part of her wanted to run, to grab her phone and call Garrett, to leave before things got worse. But another part, the part that still remembered the man Derek used to be, wanted to stay and fix this, to save her marriage, to save him. Then Derek came back, and he was holding the metal pipe. It was from the garage, part of a project he had been working on to fix the broken stair railing. Heavy steel, about 3 feet long. He held it loosely in one hand, and when Brooke saw it, every instinct in her body screamed danger. Derek, she said carefully, backing toward the door. Put that down. Let's just talk. I'm done talking, he said. You think you can say no to me? You think you have that right? I'm your wife, not your property. You're whatever I say you are. He raised the pipe and Brooke screamed. She tried to move, to dodge, to protect herself, but her pregnant body was slow, awkward. The pipe came down hard against her right femur with a crack that echoed through the house. Pain exploded through her leg, white hot and all-consuming. She collapsed to the floor, crying out, both hands instinctively wrapping around her belly. My baby, she sobbed. Please, please don't hurt my baby. Derek stood over her, the pipe still in his hands, his chest heaving. He looked down at what he had done, at his wife crumpled on the floor, and for a moment, something like horror crossed his face. Then it was gone, replaced by cold justification. You did this, he said. You made me. The front door crashed open. Garrett burst through like an avenging angel, his gun drawn, his face a mask of fury. He took in the scene in an instant, Brooke on the floor, Derek with the pipe, the violence written in every broken thing around them. Step away from her, Garrett commanded. Drop the weapon. Now. Everything happened fast after that. Derek dropping the pipe, Garrett tackling him, handcuffs clicking into place, the ambulance arriving, paramedics rushing in, Brooke being lifted onto a stretcher while she begged them to save her baby, to make sure her son was okay. As they carried her out, she looked back once. Derek was being shoved into a police car, and their eyes met. In his gaze, she saw no remorse, no apology, just rage that she had dared to defy him. And Brooke knew then that this wasn't over. It was only beginning. As the ambulance pulled away, lights flashing against the perfect suburban homes, Garrett stood in his sister's driveway and made a silent promise. Derek Hartman would never touch her again. He would make sure of it, no matter what it took. What he didn't know then was that this was only the beginning. The worst was still to come. The emergency room at Memorial Hermann Hospital was bright, sterile, and terrifying. Brooke lay on a gurney in a trauma bay, monitors beeping around her, while doctors and nurses moved with practiced efficiency. Her leg was immobilized, strapped down to prevent further damage. The pain was extraordinary, even through the medications they had given her. But worse than the pain was the fear. Is my baby okay? She asked for the 10th time, tears streaming down her face. Please, someone tell me my baby's okay. Dr. Ellen Rhodes, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and steady hands, placed an ultrasound wand on Brooke's belly. The room fell silent as everyone waited. Then, the steady thump, thump, thump of a heartbeat filled the air. Strong heartbeat, Dr. Rhodes said, her voice warm with relief. Your son is a fighter, just like his mama. But we need to keep you here for observation. The trauma to your body could trigger premature labor. And at 29 weeks, we want to avoid that if possible. Brooke closed her eyes, fresh tears falling. Thank you. Thank God. The x-rays showed a complete fracture of her right femur. The thick bone in her thigh snapped clean through. She would need surgery, pins inserted to hold the bone in place while it healed. But they couldn't do the surgery until they were sure the baby was stable. So Brooke waited, trapped in limbo between relief and terror. Garrett stayed by her side the entire time. He held her hand during the ultrasound, stood guard outside her room, and made phone calls to coordinate with the district attorney's office. When they finally had a moment alone, he pulled a chair close to her bed. I should have known, he said quietly. I should have seen the signs. How could you? Brooke whispered. I hid it from you. I made excuses. I lied. Why? Because I was ashamed. Because I thought I could fix it. Because I thought, her voice broke. I thought if I just loved him enough, he would change back into the man I married. Garrett's jaw tightened. Derek's been charged with aggravated assault and endangering a child. He's in custody. He can't hurt you anymore. But even as he said it, even as Brooke nodded, they both felt the uncertainty. The system was complicated. Justice was not always just. And Derek Hartman was the kind of man who knew how to manipulate, how to charm, how to make people believe his version of events. 2 days later, Brooke was still in the hospital when she got the news that made her blood run cold. Derek had been released on bail. His uncle, a wealthy contractor, had put up his house as collateral. Derek was out, with a restraining order that said he had to stay 500 feet away from Brooke. 500 feet, as if distance alone could protect her. Garrett was furious. He paced her hospital room like a caged animal, his hand repeatedly going to where his gun would normally be. I can't believe they let him out. He broke your leg while you were pregnant. What more do they need? What did his lawyer say? Brooke asked, her voice hollow. Garrett's expression darkened. That it was a domestic dispute that got out of hand, that Derek had been under extreme financial stress, that he's willing to attend anger management classes and marriage counseling. Marriage counseling, Brooke repeated, the words tasting like poison. He broke my leg with a pipe, and they think we need counseling. The preliminary hearing is in 3 weeks. Until then, you're coming to stay with me. My apartment has security, cameras, a doorman. He won't get near you. Brooke wanted to believe him. She wanted to feel safe. But as she lay in that hospital bed, her leg in a cast, her baby moving inside her, she felt nothing but a crushing sense of powerlessness. The man who had tried to hurt her, who had shattered her bone and her life, was walking free, and there was nothing she could do about it. That night, alone in her room, Brooke allowed herself to break down completely. She sobbed into her pillow, mourning the life she thought she would have, the family she dreamed of building, the future that now seemed impossible. She was 28 years old, pregnant, broken, and terrified. And somewhere out there, Derek was free. 3 weeks later, Brooke stood in the courtroom for Derek's preliminary hearing, leaning heavily on crutches. Her leg was still in a cast, healing slowly but surely. Her baby was fine, growing strong despite everything. But Brooke herself felt like a ghost, hollow and fragile. She had moved into Garrett's apartment, a secure building downtown with a 24-hour doorman and keycard access. She hadn't left except for doctor's appointments. And even then, Garrett or his partner Travis Reed drove her, watching for any sign of Derek. The courtroom was smaller than she expected, less dramatic than the legal dramas on television. Derek sat at the defense table in a suit, looking nothing like the monster who had attacked her. He looked clean-cut, respectable, almost sympathetic. His lawyer, a man named Richard Groves, was expensive and good at his job. The hearing was supposed to determine if there was enough evidence to proceed to trial. Brooke knew there was. She had been there, she had lived it. But watching the proceedings, listening to Groves spin a narrative of a troubled marriage and a man pushed to his breaking point, she felt her confidence waver. Your Honor, Groves said smoothly, my client does not deny that an altercation occurred. He deeply regrets the injury to his wife. But we must consider the context. Mr. Hartman is a successful businessman who has been under tremendous stress. His company was facing bankruptcy. His pregnant wife was making demands he couldn't meet. He snapped. Yes, but this was an isolated incident, not a pattern of abuse. Brooke's hands clenched into fists. Isolated incident, as if the months of escalating violence hadn't happened, as if the bruises she had hidden, the fear she had swallowed, meant nothing. The prosecutor, a stern woman named Janet Moore, presented the evidence. Photos of Brooke's injuries, medical records, the 911 call recording. When they played that recording in court, Brooke's voice, scared, desperate, begging for help, filled the room. She saw several people in the gallery wince, but Groves was relentless. He argued that Derek had no prior criminal record, that he had voluntarily enrolled in anger management classes, that he was willing to pay for all of Brooke's medical expenses and provide financial support during their separation. And then came the moment that broke Brooke's heart. The judge, an older man named Harold Patterson, reviewed the evidence and delivered his ruling. I find sufficient cause to bind this case over for trial. However, given the defendant's lack of prior criminal history and his cooperation with the court, I am reducing the charges from attempted murder to aggravated assault. Bail will continue under the current conditions. Brooke felt the floor drop out from under her. Aggravated assault, not attempted murder, as if Derek hadn't raised that pipe over her pregnant belly, as if his intention hadn't been clear. Outside the courtroom, Garrett was livid. This is insane. He tried to kill you. But he didn't, Brooke said numbly. That's what matters to them. He didn't succeed. Well, Janet Moore, the prosecutor, pulled them aside. I know this isn't what you wanted to hear, but we can still get a conviction on aggravated assault. He's looking at 2 to 10 years if we win at trial. When is the trial? Garrett asked. Probably 6 months, maybe longer. The courts are backlogged. 6 months, half a year of living in fear, waiting for justice that might never come. Brooke nodded mechanically, but inside, something was breaking. She had believed in the system, believed that the law would protect her. Now she wasn't so sure. The worst part came 2 weeks later. Brooke was at Garrett's apartment when her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. When she opened it, her blood turned to ice. It was a photo of her, taken through Garrett's apartment window from the building across the street. She was sitting on the couch, visible through the glass, unaware she was being watched. Below the photo, a message, I can always see you. Brooke dropped the phone, her hands shaking. Garrett saw her face and grabbed the device, reading the message. His expression turned dark. That son of a... He pulled out his own phone, calling it in to Travis. We need to trace this number, now. But they all knew it wouldn't matter. Derek, or someone working for him, had found a way around the restraining order. He was watching, waiting, and there was nothing the law could do until he actually violated the order in a way they could prove. That night, Brooke lay in the guest bedroom, staring at the ceiling, her hand on her belly. She had thought she was safe, thought the restraining order and Garrett's protection would be enough. But Derek had proven, once again, that walls and laws meant nothing to him. She was 7 months pregnant, terrified, and completely powerless. And the system that was supposed to protect her had failed. The stalking started small. A car that looked like Derek's truck parked down the street from Garrett's building. Not the same plates, but the same model, same color, same dent on the rear bumper. Brooke noticed it from the window on a Tuesday morning, and her blood ran cold. Gary, she called out, her voice shaking. That truck, is that? Garrett looked, grabbed his phone, called it in. By the time officers arrived, the truck was gone. No proof, no evidence, just Brooke's word and the tight knot of fear in her stomach. Then came the flowers, delivered to the apartment with no card, no name, just white roses, the same kind from their wedding. The delivery driver said they were prepaid, ordered online, untraceable. Maybe they're from someone else, Garrett suggested, but they both knew better. A letter slipped under the door that simply said, "We belong together." Written in Derek's handwriting, but with no fingerprints, no DNA, no way to prove he had touched it. Each incident was reported. Each report went into a file that grew thicker but led nowhere. Derek, when questioned, always had an alibi. The truck wasn't his wrong year, wrong plates. Just a coincidence. The flowers could have been from anyone. Old friends, her mother, a client. The letter, no fingerprints, no way to prove he sent it. His lawyer threatened harassment charges if the police didn't stop bothering his client. Brooke stopped sleeping. Every sound in the night made her jump the elevator sing. Footsteps in the hallway, the building settling. Every notification on her phone sent her heart racing. She would wake at 3 in the morning, certain she heard Derek's voice, only to find silence in darkness. She was 8 months pregnant now, her belly huge, her body exhausted. The baby was healthy, active, kicking constantly as if sensing his mother's distress. But fear kept Brooke wired, constantly alert, unable to rest even when exhaustion dragged at her bones. Garrett did everything he could. He installed additional cameras in the hallway, angled to catch anyone approaching their door, changed the locks twice, added a chain, a deadbolt, a security bar, even took a leave of absence from work to stay home with her, sleeping on the couch with his gun within reach. But he couldn't be there every second, and they both knew it. He had to sleep eventually, had to shower, eat, breathe. And in those moments, Brooke felt the weight of her vulnerability pressing down on her like a physical thing. Then things got worse. Garrett's car was vandalized in the parking garage, all 4 tires slashed with what the forensics team said was probably a hunting knife. The word "back off" was keyed into the driver's slided door in letters 6 inches tall. Security footage showed a figure in a hoodie and mask. Could have been anyone. Could have been Derek. No way to prove it. His partner Travis found a threatening note on his desk at the police station. "Tell your friend to back off, or next time it won't be just tires." The note was typed, printed on generic paper from a public library. Untraceable. And worst of all, Garrett received a formal complaint that he was harassing Derek, using his position as a police officer to intimidate a civilian. The complaint was filed through Derek's lawyer, citing multiple instances of unwanted contact and abuse of authority. It's complete nonsense. Travis told them over dinner at the apartment one evening. He had brought takeout Chinese food that none of them really ate, just pushed around their plates. But Internal Affairs has to investigate, which means, Gary, you can't be anywhere near Derek or the case until it's resolved. Can't call him, can't visit him, can't even drive past his workplace. If you do, they'll use it to suspend you. Maybe worse. Garrett slammed his fist on the table, making the plates jump. This is exactly what he wants. To isolate Brooke, to prove no one can protect her, to show that he's always one step ahead. "I know," Travis said quietly, "but if you violate the order, you lose your badge. Then you really can't help her." Brooke sat quietly, picking at her food, her appetite long gone. She had lost 12 pounds despite being 8 months pregnant, her doctor expressing concern at every appointment. Every day felt like running a marathon through quicksand. And now, even her brother, the one person she trusted completely, the one constant in her chaotic life, was being neutralized. She thought about the question that kept so many women trapped. The question she'd heard in support groups but never truly understood until now. How do you escape someone who refuses to let you go? How do you find safety when the system designed to protect you keeps failing? How do you fight when you're exhausted, pregnant, terrified, and running out of options? Maybe you couldn't. Maybe Derek would always be there, a shadow she could never quite escape, a threat that would follow her and her son for the rest of their lives. Maybe this was her reality now, forever looking over her shoulder, forever afraid, forever waiting for the next shoe to drop. That night, she met with Vivian Cross, the therapist Garrett had found for her. They met at Vivian's office, a quiet space with soft lighting and comfortable furniture designed to make people feel safe. But Brooke couldn't feel safe anywhere anymore. Vivian was in her 40s, kind but direct, with the eyes of someone who had seen terrible things and survived them. She had survived her own abusive marriage, which was why she specialized in domestic violence cases. She understood in a way most people couldn't. "How are you holding up?" Vivian asked, her voice gentle but not patronizing. "I'm not," Brooke admitted, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea she wasn't drinking. "I feel like I'm drowning every day. He finds a new way to remind me he's there, and nobody can stop him. Not the police, not the courts, nobody. It's like he's a ghost, always watching, always reaching, but never solid enough to catch. The system isn't built for prevention, Vivian said gently, leaning forward in her chair. It's built for reaction. They can't do anything until he actually violates the restraining order in a provable way. It's infuriating and wrongs, but it's reality. The law protects perpetrators more than victims sometimes. So what do I do? Brooke asked, and her voice broke on the question. How do I live like this? How do I bring a baby into this nightmare? You survive, day by day, hour by hour if you have to, minute by minute when it gets really bad. You document everything, every sighting, every flower, every letter. You keep your support system close, and you remember that his power over you is an illusion he's desperate to maintain. The fact that he's working this hard to scare you means he knows he's already lost. You're the one who left. You're the one who pressed charges. You took your power back, and he's trying to convince you that you didn't. Brooke wanted to believe that, but sitting in that office, 8 months pregnant with a broken leg that was still healing, she felt anything but powerful. She felt small and scared and utterly defeated. She felt like prey being circled by a predator who knew exactly how to stay just out of reach of the hunters. What if he never stops? Brooke whispered. What if this is my life forever? Then you learn to live anyway, Vivian said. You learn to be afraid and still keep moving. You learn that surviving is an act of defiance. And you remember that he doesn't get to write your story. You do. 2 days later, the final blow came. Brooke was checking the mail in the lobby, something Garrett had told her not to do alone. But she was tired of being helpless, tired of needing permission for everything. When she found an envelope addressed to her, her hands were already shaking before she opened it. Inside was a sonogram photo. Not hers, someone else's. A different baby, a different pregnancy. With a note in Derek's handwriting, Paige is pregnant too. Our real family starts soon. But don't worry, I'll always make time for our mistake. Brooke stood in the lobby, staring at the photo, feeling the world tilt beneath her. Paige was pregnant. Derek was planning a life with his mistress. And he called their son, the baby growing inside her, the child she already loved more than her own life, a mistake. She made it back to the apartment before collapsing on the couch, sobbing so hard she couldn't breathe, her whole body shaking with the force of it. The pain wasn't physical this time. It was deeper, rawer, a wound that went straight to her shoulders. Garrett found her there, read the note, and immediately called Janet Moore, the prosecutor. His voice was tight with barely controlled rage as he described the latest harassment, demanded they do something, anything, but Brooke barely heard their conversation. She was trapped in a realization that felt like drowning. No one could protect her, not Garrett, not the police, not the courts, not the restraining order or the charges or the evidence. Derek had proven over and over that he could reach her whenever he wanted, that he could hurt her whenever he chose, and that the law would only act after the damage was done. She placed her hand on her belly, feeling her son kick strong, insistent, alive, and she whispered, I'm so sorry I can't keep us safe. I'm so sorry I brought you into this. But even as she said it, even as despair threatened to swallow her whole, something else stirred inside her, something small but fierce. Her son kicked again, and she felt it of the will to survive. Not for herself, she had lost that somewhere along the way, but for him, for the innocent life depending on her to be strong enough, brave enough, stubborn enough to keep going. She didn't know how yet, didn't know if she could. But as she sat on that couch, Garrett's voice a distant rumble in the background, her son moving beneath her hand, Brooke made a decision. She would survive this. She had to, because giving up meant Derek won, and she refused to let him win. The domestic violence shelter was called Haven House, and it was everything Garrett promised it would be: secure, anonymous, protected. The address was unlisted, the doors reinforced, the windows barred. Women came here as a last resort, when every other option had failed. Brooke arrived on a rainy Thursday evening, her belongings packed into 2 suitcases. Garrett carried them inside, his face grim but determined. The plan was simple: let Derek think Brooke had left town, gone to stay with her mother in Oregon. Meanwhile, she would be here, safe behind locked doors, until the baby was born and the trial date arrived. The shelter director, A woman named Carol gave Brooke a tour. There were 20 beds, a communal kitchen, a playroom for children. Everything was worn but clean, practical but comforting. The other women barely looked up as Brooke passed. They had their own trauma to carry. "You'll be safe here," Carol said firmly. "We've never had an incident, ever. The security is top-notch. And even if someone found the address, they'd have to get through locked gates, cameras, and security guards. It's impossible." Brooke wanted to believe her. For the first few days, she almost did. The routine was simple: wake up, eat breakfast with the other women, attend group therapy, rest. Her due date was 3 weeks away. She could make it 3 weeks. The other women were kind. They shared their stories late at night, whispered confessions over tea in the kitchen. Maria, whose boyfriend had broken her jaw. Denise, whose husband had tried to drown her. Kelly, who had escaped with her 2 children after years of being locked in a basement. They were survivors, warriors. And for the first time, Brooke didn't feel alone in her fear. On her 5th night at Haven House, the shelter held a small baby shower for her. Nothing fancy, just donated gifts, a grocery store cake, and genuine warmth from women who understood what it meant to rebuild a life from ashes. Brooke cried happy tears as she opened tiny onesies and baby blankets. "What are you naming him?" Maria asked. "Owen," Brooke said softly. "After my father, Owen James Sullivan." The name felt like a promise, a fresh start, a life that would be different from the one Derek had tried to destroy. That night, Brooke slept better than she had in weeks. She dreamed of holding her son, of raising him somewhere sunny and safe, of a future where Derek was just a bad memory that grew fainter with time. She should have known better. At 2 in the morning, Brooke woke to the sound of her door opening. She sat up, heart pounding, expecting Carol or one of the other women. Instead, a figure filled the doorway. Tall, broad-shouldered, familiar. Derek stepped into the moonlight streaming through the window and smiled. "Did you really think you could hide from me?" he asked softly. Brooke tried to scream, but fear strangled the sound in her throat. Derek moved fast, crossing the room in 3 strides, his hand clamping over her mouth. He leaned close, his breath hot against her ear. "We're going to walk out of here quietly," he whispered. "You're going to come with me, and you're not going to make a scene, Betrayal, because if you do, if you try to run or call for help, I'll make sure everyone in this building suffers. Starting with that little girl in the room next door. Do you understand?" Brooke's blood turned to ice. She thought of Kelly's daughters, sleeping peacefully 2 doors down. She thought of Maria, of Denise, of all the women who had fought so hard to find safety. And she nodded. Derek removed his hand slowly. "Good. Now get up. Quietly." "How did you find me?" Brooke whispered. "Paige," Derek said casually. "She's a real estate agent. Remember, she has access to databases, property records. And she was very motivated to help me after she lost our baby and blamed me for the stress." He smiled grimly. "Turns out, hell hath no fury like a mistress scorned." He pulled a knife from his pocket, not to threaten, just to show her it was there. "Let's go." Where Brooke stood on shaking legs, her phone was on the nightstand, but Derek shook his head. "Leave it. You won't need it where we're going." As they walked through the dark hallways of Haven House, Brooke's mind raced. Where was Carol? Where were the security guards? How had Derek gotten through all the locks and cameras? Later, she would learn the truth. Lance Barrett, Derek's business partner, owned a security company. He had provided the shelter's alarm system years ago, and he had given Derek the codes, the blind spots, the exact way to slip in undetected. The perfect security had been an illusion all along. Derek led Brooke out a side door that should have been alarmed but wasn't. His truck was parked in the shadows, engine running. He pushed her toward it, the knife always visible, always a threat. "Get in." Brooke climbed into the passenger seat, her 8-month pregnant belly making every movement awkward and slow. Derek got in beside her and locked the doors. Then he started driving, heading away from the shelter, away from the city, away from any hope of rescue. "Where are we going?" Brooke asked, her voice breaking. Derek glanced at her, his eyes reflecting the dashboard lights, and she saw madness there. Raw, unhinged, desperate madness. Somewhere we can finally be together, he said. All three of us. Forever. And Brooke understood with terrifying clarity Derek didn't plan for them to survive this night. The truck's headlights cut through the darkness as Derek drove faster, taking turns too sharp, accelerating through yellow lights. Brooke gripped the door handle with one hand, her belly with the other. Every jolt, every sudden movement sent waves of fear through her. If they crashed, the baby Derek, please slow down, she said, trying to keep her voice calm. You're scaring me. Good, he said. You should be scared. Do you know what you have put me through? The embarrassment, the judgment, everyone looking at me like I'm some kind of monster. You broke my leg with a pipe while I was pregnant because you wouldn't listen. He slammed his hand against the steering wheel. You never listen. Not about the money, not about Paige, not about anything. You just kept pushing and pushing until I had no choice. Brooke stared at him. This was the man she had married, but she didn't recognize him anymore. Or maybe she was finally seeing him clearly for the first time. Not the charming contractor with the easy smile, not the romantic who proposed at sunset, but the broken, dangerous man underneath all those masks. Her phone was gone, left behind at the shelter. But even if she had it, what good would it do? Derek would see her trying to call for help, would stop her. Would she felt a contraction, sharp and sudden, tightening across her belly. She gasped, pressing her hand to her stomach. What? Derek glanced at her. What's wrong? Nothing, she lied. Just the baby moving. But it wasn't nothing. The stress, the fear, the physical jostling of the truck her body was reacting. Another contraction came, stronger this time. It wasn't time yet. She was only 35 weeks. Too early, too dangerous. Think, she told herself. Think. Derek's phone was in the cup holder between them. If she could grab it, if she could call 911, if she could just behind them. Headlights appeared, a car went, following close. Derek noticed too. He sped up, taking a sharp turn onto a side road. The car followed. Someone's following us, Brooke said, hope surging in her chest. Derek, someone's following us. It's your brother, Derek snarled. It has to be. How did he? He cursed, accelerating harder. The road was dark, narrow, winding through an area Brooke didn't recognize. Trees pressed close on both sides. No streetlights, no houses. Just darkness and those two sets of headlights cutting through it. Another contraction. Stronger. Brooke bit back a cry, and then she felt it, a gush of warmth between her legs. Her water had broken. Derek, she gasped. Derek, something's wrong. The baby. Shut up, he said, his eyes wild in the rearview mirror. Just shut up and let me think. But Brooke couldn't shut up. Couldn't wait. Couldn't let this happen. In that moment, feeling her son preparing to enter a world of violence and madness, something inside her snapped. Not broke, snapped into place, into focus, into absolute clarity. She was not powerless. She was not helpless. She was a martyr, and her son needed her to fight. So she did. As Derek took another sharp turn, Brooke grabbed the steering wheel and yanked it hard to the right. Derek shouted, trying to wrestle control back, but Brooke held on with all her strength. The truck swerved wildly, tires squealing, and then they were off the road, crashing through brush, tilting, rolling. The world became a chaos of sound and motion, glass shattering, metal crunching, airbags exploding. Brooke felt her body thrown against the seatbelt, held in place even as everything spun. Then, impact. The truck slammed into something solid, a tree, and stopped. Silence. Brooke hung upside down, held by her seatbelt, her ears ringing. Pain radiated through her body. But she was conscious, alive. And her baby, she felt movement, still alive. Derek wasn't moving. He was slumped against the deflated airbag, a cut on his forehead bleeding heavily. Unconscious or dead. Brooke didn't know and didn't care. She reached for the seatbelt buckle with shaking hands. It took 3 tries, but she got it undone. She fell, landing hard on the truck's ceiling, now beneath her. Every movement was agony, but she forced herself to crawl toward the shattered passenger window. Outside, she heard sirens, voices. Brooke, can you hear me? Garrett. That was Garrett's voice. She pulled herself through the window, cutting her arms on broken glass, dragging her pregnant body across dirt and debris, and then hands were grabbing her, gentle but urgent, pulling her free. "I've got you," Garrett said, his face swimming into view above her. "I've got you. You're safe now." Brooke looked up at her brother, at Travis standing behind him, at the flashing lights of police cars and an ambulance. She had survived, against every odd, against every moment of fear and powerlessness. She had survived. And then the contractions came hard and fast, and Brooke's world narrowed to one singular purpose, bringing her son into the world. 1 year later, Brooke stood in the community center in downtown Houston, holding 9-month-old Owen in her arms. He was perfect, all dark curls and bright eyes, with a smile that could light up any room. He babbled happily, reaching for the microphone as Brooke adjusted it with her free hand. The room was full. Women from Haven House, survivors from support groups across the city, advocates, counselors, lawyers, and reporters, there to cover the fundraiser for domestic violence resources. Brooke had been invited to speak, to share her story. For months, she had said no. But today, holding her son, wearing the scars of her past but no longer defined by them, she had said yes. "Thank you all for being here," she began, her voice steady. "A year ago, I was a different person. I was someone who believed that love meant sacrifice, that good women made marriages work no matter what, that if I just tried hard enough, I could fix everything." She paused, looking down at Owen, who was chewing on his fist. "I was wrong. Love isn't supposed to break your bones. Partnership isn't supposed to require losing yourself. And no amount of trying can fix someone who doesn't want to be fixed." In the audience, Garrett watched with pride. Beside him sat Vivian Cross, the therapist who had walked Brooke through the darkest days. In the back row, Carol from Haven House wiped away tears. "Derek Hartman is currently serving 25 years in prison," Brooke continued. "He was convicted of kidnapping, aggravated assault, stalking, and conspiracy. His business partner, Lance Barrett, is serving 12 years for obstruction of justice and bribery. The system that failed me at first eventually worked, but it took too long. It almost cost me everything." She shifted Owen to her other hip. "That's why I'm here today, to tell you that if you're in danger, if someone you love is hurting you, you are not alone, you are not weak for staying, and you are not broken for leaving. You are human, and you deserve safety." The room was silent, everyone hanging on her words. "It's been a year of healing, physical therapy for my leg, which still aches on rainy days. Therapy for my mind, for the nightmares that still come sometimes. Building a life as a single mother, which is hard, but also beautiful. Owen will never know his father, and that's okay. He'll know his Uncle Garrett, who saved us. He'll know the community of strong people who helped us rebuild, and he'll know me not as a victim, but as his mother, who fought for him even when she couldn't fight for herself." She looked directly at the cameras. "To anyone watching who needs to hear this, leaving is hard. Surviving is harder. But you can do it. I did, and I'm not special. I'm not uniquely strong or brave. I'm just a woman who decided she wanted to live, that her child deserved to live, and that was enough." After the speech, Brooke accepted hugs from strangers, exchanged numbers with other survivors, posed for photos holding Owen. It was exhausting and overwhelming and also deeply healing. Later, back at her apartment, a small one-bedroom she rented on her own, with money from her freelance graphic design work, she put Owen to bed in his crib. He fought sleep like he fought everything, with determination and energy. But eventually, he succumbed, his little chest rising and falling in peaceful rhythm. Brooke stood watching him for a long time, her hand resting on the crib rail. This life wasn't what she had imagined when she said yes to Derek's proposal on that beach. It wasn't the fairy tale she had dreamed of, but it was real. It was safe. It was hers. Her phone buzzed. A text from Garrett. "Proud of you, sis. Mom would be too." She smiled, typing back a heart emoji. Then another text, this one from Vivian. "You were amazing today. Dinner next week." "Yes," Brooke replied. She was building a life, piece by piece, a community, a purpose, a future. There was no new romance in her story. No billionaire savior, no knight in shining armor. Just Brooke, learning to save herself, learning that she was enough, all on her own, that survival was victory, that every day she woke up and chose to keep going was an act of defiance against the man who had tried to break her. Derek still sent letters sometimes, from prison. Brooke never opened them. She handed them directly to her lawyer, who added them to the file. Evidence of continued harassment, ammunition for keeping him behind bars as long as possible. She didn't hate him anymore. Hate required energy she wouldn't waste. She felt nothing when she thought of him except relief that he was gone and gratitude that she was here. As Brooke climbed into her own bed that night, in her own home, with her son sleeping peacefully in the next room, she whispered the same words she whispered every night. We made it. We're safe. We're free. And in the morning, when Owen woke her with his hungry cries, when she lifted him from his crib and held him close, when she saw the sunrise through her window painting everything gold, Brooke knew those words were true. They had survived, and now they were living.